Hi everyone, I'm Tim Renshaw. Welcome to this segment of In Touch. They've let me out of my little office to actually get on camera instead of fixing it or being behind it or talking to someone about it for a change. I appreciate that opportunity to be on here because I'm going to get a chance to talk and share this conversation with an old friend. Now, we just met today for the first time, but I have known this gentleman in his capacity as a news anchor since, well, I'm sorry, Howard, since I was a little kid. We have as a guest today on the program, Howard Caldwell, long-time anchor. 35 years you were with Channel 6, over in Indianapolis, right. Starting out as WFBM TV and then eventually WRTV, as folks know it today. But you were there kind of from the beginning of television news, weren't you?
Well, almost, I guess, because I was in Terre Haute, actually, during the 50s.
Okay.
And sort of getting my feet wet on just what the heck it was all about. And I had the print journalism background, and when they suddenly got their television, Tony Holman on this station, he said, okay, go ahead, what are you going to do? And I thought, well, I guess I'll do what I would do if this was print. We're going to shoot film, and then we're going to look at it and see and tell the editors the way we want it to be arranged, and then write a script. And so things kind of came together, even though we didn't quite know what we were doing.
Now this was at WTHI?
That's right.
In Terre Haute?
WTHI.
Was the TH Tony Holman, was that part of the call
well,
was that?
There were a lot of things that were TH in Terre Haute. And I figured, yeah, it must be.
Yeah, of course, Tony Holman of Indianapolis 500 fame, the owner of the Speedway for so many years.
He was a very fine gentleman.
I had an opportunity to meet him one time, a long time ago, and it was just a brief meeting. But he was an impressive gentleman.
Yes, he was.
And now I'm impressed to have the opportunity to talk with you. We found out for our viewers here in Greenfield and even down in New Pal, there's a Howard Caldwell Willow Branch connection, which is a little town in the northeastern portion of Hancock County. Tell us about your Willow Branch connection, because the Renshaws were from there as well.
Well, I must admit, I wasn't there much, but my grandmother Felt, my mother's mother, had been born in Willow Branch, I believe, and lived there as a child. And then I became a teacher and met Judge Felt, and Judge Edward Felt. I found in my files sometimes he was called Edwin and sometimes Edward, but he was a very prominent person who was the judge here of your courts, and then went to Indianapolis when he was elected to the to a state level judge. So anyway, I just heard little things about that, and sometimes there were relatives who came from Willow Branch to see my grandmother.
I had no idea that there was a Willow Branch connection, because that's also how I became introduced to Howard Caldwell, was visiting my grandparents in Willow Branch. And it was like you were part of the family, because there's Howard Caldwell on the television, and there's my grandpa, and there's my grandma, and you were just one of the members of the family, because every time we were there, for some reason or other, you were on TV. I don't know if we just always hit the same time or what. It had to have been some coincidence like that. But anytime I think of my grandparents, I think of you. Anytime I think of Willow Branch, I think of you, because, you know, you were the guy. I could not tell you, because I don't think we watched any other channel, who anchored the news on any of the other channels on 8 or 13 back then, because there was only Howard Caldwell.
Well, there's a lot of competition going on now in the television news area in Indianapolis, for sure. Now,
I understand you still keep an eye on things. You critique and judge and keep an eye on the news operations in town. And you said we'd talked on the radio for a program that'll air Saturday that you're keeping an eye on Channel 59 now, since they've become a news operation.
Yes.
We'll do that because we have a former student from this program who's a news producer there now.
Oh, is that right?
And so keep an eye on her.
Oh, I think. Well, you know, what they do out there is very smoothly done.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, I guess they do a lot better job than we did, but sometimes I just don't quite. There's so many stories of about killings and horrible accidents, and I see you can't ignore these things, but we don't get to some other things I wish we would do that would be just a little more involved and would I guess just needed a heavy journalism role.
Well, the role of television news has changed to where it doesn't fall under so much a news department anymore as it does an entertainment division. There's a lot of other influences on what does make the news and what doesn't make the news. What attracts attention. Hype the weather is an example. That's something that we talk with the kids here about a lot. What they may say in a bump, for the newscast, some kind of a tease for the newscast, will scare you to death. My wife was terrified of the weather forecast last night because somebody was saying, oh, they're 5, 6, 4, inches and all that kind of stuff. I'm on the computer looking at the weather at the same time, and I'm not seeing it in there. So they're out there hyping the weather. So there's that part of it has changed. You were in the golden age of television journalism and had an opportunity to do an interview with a very, very prominent political figure. You interviewed Indira Gandhi before she had actually stepped into even the official residence yet, didn't you?
That's right. And it was only because I was working for a station that had a big news direction they were following because it was Time Life owned, and they wanted to do more than was happening at the time. This was in the 1960s, and a lot of us got foreign assignments, and they owned several stations, and that happened to be mine. And it came at an unusual, it was not anticipated. Suddenly, the Prime Minister died, and Indira Gandhi was to take over, since she has the Congressional Committee, because everything was in their General Assembly. But here it was, and here we were, and so after a lot of effort, we did get an interview with her, but it didn't hurt that Time magazine also had done a story on her with her on the cover, but they hadn't really interviewed her, so they just had information in the background.
Now, you did have a little communications problem when you were there in India trying to get to her house. Your cab driver?
Well, yes, cab driver took us to where Mahatma Gandhi had lived, and it was at night and it was dark, and I said, no, wait a minute. He didn't, and I said, we want to go to Indira Gandhi's house. That is a very common name, like Jones in Indiana, our country.
Now, if you were to do that kind of interview today, you would have a sound person, you would have a makeup person, you'd have a lighting person, you'd have a camera person, you'd probably have a couple of 3 camera people there because you'd want to catch all the angles. You had a huge crew with you for that event, didn't you?
Yeah, one photographer.
Your photographer.
And we lugged, those things were a little heavy then. Yep. It was all black and white film. Yep. Well, some color film we had too.
You shot 16 millimeter film.
16 millimeter film.
So there was nothing really instant about it. Once you shot the film, it had to be taken back and developed and processed and all that kind of stuff, and then edited for the interview. It was quite an involved process.
But I must say that at that time, and we were talking about the mid-'60s now, that India was just very, very cooperative in every way. And we got over to Pakistan, and they wanted to see everything we shot. And we talked and talked and talked. Finally, we convinced them that we're going to send it back to the United States, but then they'll show it to your people there that are in the United States, and they agreed to it because it went straight to. We were NBC affiliate then. And got on the Today Show. Yeah,
I was going to just say that footage didn't air just in Indianapolis. It got national exposure.
No, it did get. That's right.
With television making all the changes that it has made over the years, there are some things that are good and some things that are bad. I want to stick with your career a little bit and tell us, besides in Darragani, that's got to be a major highlight. What was the best thing, the most favorite thing that happened during your career? Someone that you got to talk to, or a story that you got to cover? What was probably the most fun?
Well, I think that the thing that happened after we went to producers separately meant that the anchors no longer the anchors were losing the grip of where does that story go and who's doing it and who's writing it, and it was all different, and so that bothered me a lot, and Channel 6 came up with a plan that I will never forget. They said, okay, what do you want to do? How about a series of Howard's Indiana? You've been here, you grew up here, you might find things that you want to do. And so they let me alone, and we had a helicopter service, and we could go any place. We did a whole series on the Wabash River, for instance. We got out in the water and did all those little historic segments that went with that. So that kind of saved me.
That was a great deal of fun too. Those were kind of little mini documentaries of the highlights of the state.
Very much
you could hop
so.
in a helicopter and be anywhere in just a very short period of time.
That's right. Now, I didn't get into that, but we had people who were assigned to that to do all the research and the script, and they would wave off prime time stuff of the networks to air those things, and it was about local issues, local matters, controversial.
Yeah.
They don't do that anymore. And did editorials too.
There's something I haven't seen on television in a long time.
No.
I have heard editorializing in a news story, but an actual editorial, no.
No.
Not on the local stations. The general managers used to do that, or the news director used to do that. You used to do that.
Well, some, but our general manager, we also had an editorial chief, Bob Gamble, did most of them.
Well, we do appreciate the opportunity to have you on our television channel here on Cougar Television, and part of our In Touch program. Some of the folks that are involved here in the studio are considering television as a career. What would you give them in the way of advice as we kind of wrap things up?
Well, I would say that television is still got to be interesting. The freedom is not quite there as it once was, and it bothers me. But I have a scholarship there under my name at Butler that and they choose somebody that's outstanding to get that every year. And that was a nice thing that Channel 6 did for me when I retired. And it's still going. And the other thing that bothers me, though, that it's just going to happen. The newspaper, the newspapers are fading away, and I'm hearing that the kids that are in college today studying journalism are not planning to go into newspapers because they're fading away, and their salaries aren't there, and they want to get into television or even public relations.
Right. The industry is expanding beyond just what you can find here too. There's whole industries built around what can be done on the internet as well, like that. There are a lot of job opportunities out there. But right. Just in the few seconds we've got left, you did mention Butler University. You are a Butler grad.
Yes, I am.
And you do kind of keep an eye on the basketball team.
Absolutely.
Zach Hahn did pretty well last night. Did you watch the game?
Oh, yes,
well,
I did.
There's a connection there with our family. We can keep an eye on what Zach is doing as well. Howard Caldwell, we thank you very much for being a part of our program today. It has been a true honor to have you on here, and
thank you,
thank
Jim.
you for joining us.
Thank you.